keep doing daily videos on YouTube, I need to raise my Patreon and Subscribestar income to a grand total of $200 a month. So if you're so inclined, help a chap out. Zang. Boris Johnson, the UK Prime Minister, is in the intensive care unit in hospital and may well have to be intubated, which means his prospects aren't terribly good. And it would seem that it is desired that I should give a shit whether he lives or dies, that I should be concerned for his well-being. It seems to be required that I give a shit for Bojo's well-being. And guess exactly how much sympathy I have for Boris Johnson.
How much?
None at all.
By a strange coincidence, none at all is exactly how much of a shit Boris Johnson has given for EU couples, immigrant families, the Windrush people who've been having issues, poor people who've been forced, even before all of this, into food banks and other emergency measures because of universal credit. He has been part of, in the cabinet of, and now leads the party that forced a decade of austerity on the UK, that gutted the NHS as a pretext to sell it off, and what do you know, it turns out we need it.
Son of a bitch must pay.
Yeah, this party has killed over 100,000 people through the effects of austerity. It's in drip, 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 rather than the suddenness of a coronavirus epidemic. They're inhuman. There's no other word for it. Rees-Mogg, his company that he's involved with, is using the disaster, using the situation to try and profit.
Isn't that rather unethical behaviour?
Oh, is it? I'm afraid I'm a bit out of touch.
And you expect me to have sympathy for this man. You expect me to have empathy for this man. Now, I'm not proud of myself at all for this. I'm just acknowledging the truth of it and saying, okay, I know I should set all that stuff aside and I should be sympathetic to this guy, to his situation. You know, he's got a child on the way who could grow up without a father, just like the rest of Boris Johnson's kids, I suppose, really. He's got a partner who would miss him. He's probably got friends or acquaintances that he uses, but who regard him as a friend. You know, I understand and I accept all that. I'm not proud of myself for feeling the way that I do, but I couldn't give two tugs of a dead dog's cock if he dies. In fact, it would be karma.
It's a rational transaction. One life for billions.
Alright, I've got friends who are disabled. I rely on benefits to some degree due to my mental health issues, and this is a man and a party that has not given a toss for anybody in living memory and has aggressively set about dismantling our society. And again, what do you know, here we are and we need it. So I'm sorry, but I cannot muster one scintilla, one iota, one fragment of empathy or sympathy for this cunt.
Do you expect mercy here?
Now, there's plenty of well-meaning lefties who are pretending to be outraged that I couldn't give a toss about the fate of Boris Johnson because they want to maintain the moral high ground. And that's something I understand most of the time. I do too. Like I say, I recognise that this is a moral failing on my part, that I can't muster sympathy for Boris Johnson. But you know, I can acknowledge that. I can integrate that. I can examine that. And I can see that it's a thing, and I can understand why. Because my connection, my empathy, my sympathy is to everybody he's fucked over. And as a consequence of that, I can't hold any sympathy for him. So there's those.
In these enlightened days, of course, no one believes a word of it.
I'm sorry, but I don't believe a word of it.
And then there's the Gaminati the Daily Mail reading, wattle shaking, angry mob of red-faced sherry drinkers going, well, so much for the tolerant left. Oh, Remainers are just inhuman. They don't care about Boris Johnson. Suddenly these people discover the worth of empathy and sympathy and caring for others when it's one horrible cunt, but they couldn't muster the sympathy and understanding for Remainers whose lives were being overturned, for trans-European couples, for the Windrush people, equally, most of them pretty goddamn racist. Couldn't give a fuck about swathes, hundreds, thousands of people having their lives disrupted so long as they were getting their way. But if you can't muster sympathy for Boris Johnson, suddenly they find out that they actually care about other human beings.
I still don't believe you.
Why not?
You tend to lie a lot.
Hey.
The best we can hope for, I suppose, is that Bojo has his brush with death, is cared for by immigrant and European doctors and porters and nurses and everything else that's needed, and comes away with a sudden revelatory understanding that there is value to socialism. And the NHS needs to be properly funded and supported, and that our infrastructure needs to be, properly supported, and that our essential workers are not disposable precariat. They need some job security. They need some more money. That's the absolute best that we can hope for in this scenario, I think. But I don't think he's the type of leopard to really change his spots. Alright, so what happens should Bojo cark it and shuffle off this mortal coil? Well, I believe immediately Dominic Raab is the one who's supposed to take over. Not particularly competent or useful a fellow, which is perhaps the very reason he was entrusted with that. In recent years, we've had deputy prime ministers who, it doesn't really have any force of law or anything, but it would seem that in this sort of situation, that would be the person to take over. But Boris hasn't appointed one. I mean, it's not something you have to do. It's not an official position, really. It's just something that's been done in recent years. But now they're moving away from it. So, who would take over? It's not really clear. Typically, one of the bigger members of the cabinet, I would suspect. So the Chancellor or the Home Secretary, someone like that, depending on the situation, would be the ones to typically take over. The Queen would probably, under advisement from the Privy Council, invite someone to take over, and then at some point there would be a leadership election within the party whose leader popped his clogs, and that would be that. But we don't have any real clear line of succession rules in the UK, and there are innumerable articles on this at the moment, should you wish to educate yourself further. But to get back to the point and to hammer my point and my position home, right? Normally I do care very much about everyone's life and rights, even paedophiles, rapists, murderers, you name it. I don't think there should be a death penalty, whatever else. But I can't bring myself to sympathise or to empathise with Boris Johnson, who has done or been complicit in so many horrible things that have directly affected people that I know and care about, that has undermined and destroyed the country that I could have perhaps been proud of in some way. He's still forcing through Brexit. at a time when we're likely to be facing a global recession or depression in the near future. So a double whammy to the UK economy. I cannot sympathise or empathise or have just any consideration for him. He's getting, as far as I can see, what he deserves. But, and this is the important bit which people seem to keep missing, I recognise that that's unworthy of me. I recognise that that's a moral and ethical failing on my part, that I can't extend that human empathy towards Boris Johnson. And I'm just not lying about it. It's better to be honest, isn't it? Here's hoping whatever happens, it creates some kind of positive change. But I doubt it. Zang. "Rrrr," said the grinder as it chewed its way through Alice, from the crown of her head all the way down to her toes. It ate the lot of her, unfussy, snout to tail, and cleared its plate. It gnashed its way through her dress, her pinafore, her shoes, and her unmentionables. It chewed her hair, devoured her scalp, gobbled up her arms, wolfed down her legs, gorged itself on her torso, noshed on her skin, and gulped her down without so much as a burp to show for it.
Today. See, I don't like the, I have, okay, like a lot of you, I hate a lot, you know? But I hate with style and creativity.